Do you ever feel like there's something missing from mini painting YouTube videos?
How do you do that step? The whole face is magically painted now?
I should know, I've contributed to this problem. This start to finish series is how I make right on that problem. In this video, we're gonna paint the first model of my new Star Wars Legion army from start to finish. You'll see how I come up with a scheme for a new army, how I test it on this individual mini, and how I make him look special like a character while still learning tips and tricks that I can apply to my future Imperial grunts. Got a new army and don't know where to start? This may be the video for you. I have a history of ignoring mainstream media when it comes to painting my Star Wars characters. But for this army, I want to stick a little closer to the IP while still putting my spin on it. The unfortunate part about the bad guys of the Star Wars universe, however, is that their color palette is not very inspiring. It's a lot of black, white, and gray. However, there are often a lot of red and blue LEDs on various gear, equipment panels, and the legs. Maybe we can run with that. A trick I often employ is to use many different versions of the same basic color. For example, if I know I'm gonna have a small little blue LED, I may try to highlight the black armor with a gray that's a little bit more blue. Or if I'm gonna have red, well, maybe I can include blood splattering. Including colors in this way helps to trick our mind. Instead of seeing a mini and thinking he looks like he belongs on a sports team because 80% of the model is covered in pure red and pure blue, we use them in a more realistic and subtle way, and we get a less ham-fisted result. So I have an idea that uses the tiny little red and blue LEDs as inspiration, and then I'll reuse those colors in subtler ways. To add a third color, let's take a look at the split complementary of those two. We can find the halfway point in between red and blue, and then flip-flop to the other side of the wheel, and we get yellow. Yellow is an interesting color because we can sneak it into white in a convincing way, which is the color that often appears on Stormtrooper armor and similar. And it also gives the armor a vintage feel, like yellowing plastic Stormtrooper toys or the troopers in Episode 4 on Tatooine. And I've always kind of loved that retro futuristic vibe. Coming up with a solid scheme for your miniatures is important. Do you know what's another important scheme? Your scheme. I'm talking about your fit. Thankfully, this video sponsor can help us out. Into the AM is an apparel brand helmed by passionate and authentic artists. All their designs are created by their in-house illustrators and printed on soft, breathable, and well-fitting shirts. I picked this shirt because I'm into undead things. Pretty simple. Oh, and also, it glows in the dark. Into the AM has also expanded their catalog beyond graphic tees to other clothing as well. I wear a lot of long sleeve button ups with a graphic t-shirt underneath. So this combo that I got from Into the AM works great for me. Unless I'm going to a fancy dinner with my wife, this is the exact kind of outfit I'd wear every single day of the week. I left this brown long sleeve downstairs while filming this video and just wore it every single day for a week. For me, that's proof to myself that this shirt belongs in my closet and will get worn a lot. Compared to my other shirts like this one is clearly high quality. It's thicker, it has some stretch to it, it's soft, super nice button-up shirt. Thank you to Into the AM for these elevated everyday graphic tees. Get yours now when you click on the link below. I don't have the scheme fully figured out in my head, but let's jump into painting to see if we can solidify a few more ideas. Okay, to get started on this character, we're going to start with the larger detail on him, which is his black fabric. And I'm going to start with kind of a weird step where I repaint all this black primer with another black paint. And I'm doing that for a few reasons. One, if I ever need to fix something about this black fabric, which that's an important note, this is going to be black eventually, I want to do it with a paint that I know is going to match what is on the miniature. And I don't paint with primer very often, so I'm going to repaint it with this black paint that I have. And secondly, this guy is going to have a mixture of black paints on him, kind of a colder glossier, plasticky black, and then a more fabricy, more matte, warm black. And it's sometimes difficult to differentiate between those two kinds of colors because they're both just different versions of black. And so one thing I'm going to use to help me differentiate those two colors is finish. So my more fabric-y color is going to use more of a matte paint range in scale 75. And my more plasticky, kind of like leather armor options or versions are going to use a more satin paint range. And that is going to help me differentiate the two, despite the fact that they are, both the color black. So for that reason, we are base coating all this fabric again. Okay, that coat is dry. We can see it has made it look more matte, but I can even tell that it's still a little streaky. You can see some difference in finish right there at the bottom, maybe on the back here. It's hard to note when you actually reach opacity when you are painting black over black because, it's the same color. But like with every other paint, you want to do 2 base coats of this to make it nice and opaque, and in this case, just nice and matte all over. We don't want any weird, streaky, glossy stuff. Reiterating what our goal is for this scheme is we're going to use red and blue because of all the fun little LEDs that we're going to see here on his chest and maybe like his scope and other opportunities to use small versions of those colors. Another way we're going to reinforce that decision is by using those colors in subtle ways. And one of those subtle ways you may have already picked up on, and it's with this black leather. One of the black colors we're going to do is a warm black color, highlighted with, you'll see in a little bit, reds and maybe some browns and other colors to make it live in the warm world. And then the other black we're going to do is highlighted with cold colors, blues and stuff like that to make it feel different than the warm option. But that's just one way that we are going to start to use red and blue in a subtle way, which, if you were to look at it, you wouldn't maybe necessarily notice, but I like to believe that it contributes to the overall paint scheme compared to just painting everything on this model the exact same shade of black with the exact same buildup. I'm still getting an inconsistent result on the back here, and so I'm just gonna paint it one more time. I'm honestly gonna paint it as many times as I need to get this to look consistent, because where I'm noticing some of this inconsistency is in the shadowed areas, which that would just be very annoying to deal with, because my future layers that is also coming from scale 75 that are also matte are going to be highlights. And so those areas would target the areas that are currently matte, leaving behind this glossy shadow color. So I just want to make sure that everything is nice and matte before we continue. I've heard issues of scale 75 in the past from others lacking opacity. So that would be consistent with what is occurring right now, the fact that I'm needing a few layers of this black to get a true matte result all over the figure. I think that's gonna be good enough, and now we're gonna move on to doing some highlights. And I don't really know what is right for this, but we will use some deep red from scale 75. Again, another matte paint range, keeping in that matte family. When you mix red into black, you get kind of a brown color, and for all intents and purposes, for us, this is just going to be kind of like a warm black. But we'll try to stay away from it feeling like brown. We don't want our black to look like brown. We want it just to be a warm black. And so we'll get our initial color here, and then we will stop mixing red in, because the more red I mix in for future highlights, we'll just continue to make it look more and more brown, and we'll use a different color in the future, which you will see. So I'm going to mix more paint than I think I need, because I'm going to use this paint to mix my future layers. So now we have a nice off black, warm, very, very dark brown color, and we'll use that for our initial highlights. It's very possible that this is going to be a very insignificant highlight that I apply to this black. We will see when it all dries and we can kind of see what's going on here. I'm not too concerned about these small little wrinkly volumes on the shirt right now. I kind of want to just get like a lot of paint on this Mini and then start to suss out some of the details. As far as where I apply highlights and shadows, there are a few things that matter to me. I care about surfaces that are perpendicular to my imagined above light source. So in this case, like a sun that's pointing straight down, which is why I'm painting this like lower area right here, because it is kind of flaring out a little bit. And so if we were to imagine this thing, looking at it from its peripheral, it flares out a tiny amount. But if we are, thinking about mini painting, or just exaggerating stuff here, and so I'm just imagining this thing, continuing that flare out, and I'm treating it like maybe it's doing that. Mini painting is all about contrast and just kind of overdoing it. And in this case, I'm overdoing it for the sake of being able to see some detail from the tabletop. This whole front jacket thing seems to be kind of flaring out a little bit. And so I will give it at least one, if not two rounds of highlights. I don't want it to be like as bright as my brightest highlights, but I want to give it just, a little bit of zhuzh, a little bit of love. It's also a lot of vertically running, sculpting kind of detail. I want to hit all those high areas with some paint as well. The other thing that I care about is I just want to like paint kind of linearly, linearly. I don't know. I want to paint kind of like top down in each section. So I'm looking at his waist right now. I want to paint his butt area brighter than, say, the lower area. And the same is true for his torso area, kind of up above. I want to paint his shoulders and his neck area and his upper chest brighter than I paint the rest of his torso. So speaking of, let's do that. His forearms are facing more up toward my imagined light source than the backside of his arms, where his, tricep is and stuff like that, at least on his right arm. Otherwise, we'll do this part of the arm that's kind of facing outward. I don't know if that was enough of that layer. I don't know if that layer was dark enough. I don't know if that layer was too brown. I'm not entirely sure at the moment, but we are going to progress on here, and we're going to do that with maybe kind of a weird color. Okay, and for my next highlight here, I'm going to mix in a Caucasian skin tone called Basic Flesh from scale 75. Again, we're keeping it all nice and matte, and I am going to use a color that is less red, still warm, but less red and has more white mixed into it, because that will increase our brightness while not bringing us so much closer to red than if we just continued to use this deep red from scale 75. I have never done this exact color progression before, so I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm just explaining to you what my idea is and why I'm choosing the colors that I'm choosing. I'm probably going to mix my highlights less aggressively than if I were painting a lighter, more vibrant color, like a straight up blue or a vibrant red. And that's because with black, I really do want this to feel like black in the end. And very often while painting black, you tend to overshoot the mark and get into this kind of gray area, or in my case, a dark brown area. And so I'm gonna go a little bit, maybe a little bit slower, paint a little bit less of a highlight on these areas just to avoid overshooting the mark. I think it's probably inevitable. It's probably gonna happen no matter what we do, but we'll try our best to not do that. I kind of realize that I'm probably focusing too much on painting the lower parts of these front skirty bits and not enough on the upper areas close to the waistline. There's just so much like tech and belts and stuff there that it's kind of like blocking a lot of that, but I want to make sure that on the stuff that you can see, I am doing some amount of highlighting. I'm still not going to worry about these tiny little volumes on the sleeves and in the neck and in the chest and in this abdomen area. I know I'm going to have to come back with black paint to adjust these colors to make them look more black. And I figure while I'm doing that, I will also just carve in the detail of these tiny little cloth wrinkles. I'm going to hit it with a hairdryer, take stock of where we are, and then continue from there. I'm just going to do that same layer again just to get some more opacity on some of these highlights, particularly on these arms and on the chest and on the back. I think I'm struggling the most to get opacity there because of all the detail on the model. It's not flat, and I'm not being super careful to make sure I nail every single surface perfectly. Okay, it's looking good. I like it. It's staying pretty dark still. I can see some of the contrast in there. And we're just gonna mix in some more skin tone here to get it even lighter. We're also desaturating this color, making it kind of like grayish, which is great for our highlights. We want to be in a gray world when doing black highlights. That makes sense. I think I'm gonna now avoid working on the bottom portions of the skirty bits and instead focus more on those areas that I mentioned before that I care about, like the top parts of details. So on the lower half, that would be like the top of his waist, his butt, and stuff like that. And on his torso, on his upper half, that would be his shoulders, his upper back, his upper chest, and stuff like that. Maybe we can do some edge highlighting with this brighter color on the lower halves, but I don't want to do any kind of like traditional highlighting. Again, I'm also trying to be very scarce with how much highlight color I end up using in each individual place. I'm going to use very little. Originally, I thought I was going to airbrush this mini, and I was going to start with the torso because, you know, that's going to end up being the white armor that I talked about, kind of that nice vintagey yellow color. And then I kind of figured that, you know, that area is actually really small on the model, his torso. And so we don't actually need to waste time with the airbrush. The airbrush, there's a lot of back and forth with the airbrush, cleaning it and preparing new paint, and for a singular piece of armor on his torso, I don't think it's necessarily worth it. And then I was like, okay, maybe I'll airbrush the black. And I was kind of looking at the black leather, and honestly, it's not that suited for airbrushing. I think airbrushing really works amazingly when you have big, nice, round surfaces. And in this case, you know, this is a small 32 millimeter model. We don't really have a lot of that. We have a lot of straight detail, like his the fabric of his undersuit here is very straight. There's not a lot of nice round curves and stuff like that. You could totally airbrush this. I'm not saying that's you shouldn't do it. I'm just telling you why I chose to paint with a paintbrush, because I just feel like it's a better suited tool for the kinds of details that I'm seeing on this mini. I think we're starting to get to maybe too brown of a result here, which, you know, I can kind of see that happening. You know, it's like almost like we're painting with maroon right now. And so instead of continuing to use flesh for the future even brighter highlights on this mini, I think I'll just use white. So we've established kind of a warm color for this black. And now with that established, we can just mix in a little bit of white. And because it's going on top of this like warm base coat, it'll feel warm without, you know, needing to add any additional warmth. I'm actually gonna mix a little bit of black in here as well as the white, just to desaturate it more. Like I want more of this red color to go away. And when you add white, when you add black to any color, you are going to desaturate it a little bit. I'm also going to add some water here to my wet palette, just so I'm not like constantly reaching into my sponge and getting it all messy and nasty. Oof, that was a mistake. My highlight color is was too bright, and so I wanted to darken it by adding some black, but I added too much. I'm gonna widen out this mix a little bit just to grab more of this kind of like maroon base coat we have. I didn't mean to add that much black and white. The more black and white I have, the further away I get from this warm place that we were, and I kind of got it perfect, and then I put a bunch of black paint in it. I'm gonna get a smaller brush with more control. The Minework brushes, you know, have a very similar feel to a lot of Kolinsky table brushes, but they're just so thin and so dagger-like. You can really get into specific spots. I find that when painting highlights on dark things, your highlights shrink in size faster than if you were painting something that was light. There's probably a physical property that defines that more clearly, but what I'm gonna do now is these highlights that I'm applying now I will care about these little wrinklies. Whew, that is too bright. That is too bright. Pause. We need to mix in more darkness. And I'll just use the original warm brown color that we established. I want to desaturate it a little bit. Here we go. Okay. I'm liking that. Let's try it again. As I was saying, for highlights on dark things, they get smaller faster than highlights on light things. And so this layer, I'm going to try to be sparing. Try to bring some of this detail back and start to creep into our final highlight for this first detail that we're painting. Can maybe even go so far as to add some texture, and that can be another element of contrast in between this warm black and the cold black. Maybe the plasticky cold black doesn't have a lot of scratches and weathering on it, but the more fabricy, warmer black does. And so you get kind of even another element of contrast in between the two different blacks on the Mini. Just taking a look right now at the model, taking stock of it, I'm noticing something and I want to share that with you. This lower half is looking, you know, pretty convincing just for a couple of minutes of painting. You know, it feels dark. It maybe could use a little bit more black, but you know, it's feeling okay. Upper part right here by the arm, not feeling okay, not feeling like black at all. And the reason for that is because there are so many grooves on the fabric, so many deeper recesses that have no black in it at all, no visible black. Right here, visible black. On the front of this arm, no visible black. And so I think that we are on the right track. I'm encouraged by this because I know I still have a step to go where I'm going to reintroduce those black shadows. So that is kind of giving me a little bit of confirmation that I'm kind of on the right track. But we'll see. Never get too confident with mini painting. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a video with a plan to demonstrate something with a thing that I thought was gonna work perfectly, and then it just doesn't, and then I have to pivot. The fabric on this arm is sculpted nicely. It's one of those hard things to define. Sometimes the detail on certain clothing is just so fine and so small that it's difficult to paint in a, you know, in kind of an enjoyable, convincing way. This color is also light enough to the point where if we are not achieving opacity with it, it's gonna look chalky and bad. And so I'm gonna just, you know, maybe do another layer of highlights in some of the areas where I'm noticing that chalkiness. I find that matte paint especially produces those chalky effects on lighter highlights, and that's just because you're not getting full opacity over the previous layer you just painted. So if you're ever experiencing chalkiness, just consider doing another highlight with that same color you just did that caused that chalkiness. This little torso area, it's hard to paint. That does not look good. Okay, let's start solving some issues. There's a chunk of brightness here that is just way too bright. So we're going to kind of knock that back a bit. No highlight anywhere on this model is as big as that highlight is. And so we need to just calm down a bit. I think I'm going to bring back even just more of the super dark black color. I'm noticing some chalkiness here on the collar. So we'll just come back in and try to get rid of that chalkiness with another layer. On this arm, there's just so much fabric detail. It's actually hard to see where it is. And I'm going to maybe need to make some creative choices about where there are certain pieces of fabric and where there aren't certain little rolls of fabric. One thing I'm noticing that I'm not liking is that this arm, his right one, our left one, is kind of facing forward in a way that's causing me to place highlights such that we're seeing it in a front angle view. And this other arm, which is kind of hanging back here, it isn't. I'm kind of actually placing highlights on the part you can't see, facing away from us. And that's causing this kind of like very bizarre, like that arm is super bright and that arm isn't bright at all. And it feels strange. And so what I'm gonna do to fix that while still kind of obeying the laws of physics that I've established in my brain here is that some of these pieces of fabric stretch around all the way to this side. And I'm just gonna give them a little bit of highlighting attention just so that, you know, from this front on view, it's not like completely the opposite. You know, one is completely light and one is completely dark. You know, I want there to be, you know, a little bit of highlight obvious from the front on both arms. I'm probably painting it a little bit too bright at the moment, and so I'm going to need to pare it down, but we will cross that bridge when we get there. Don't need to worry about it yet. Okay, I'm actually not gonna touch the lower half of this model anymore. I think it looks totally fine. I'm pretty happy with it. But the upper half needs some work. Okay, now let's go back with some black paint that we started with to carve in some of these details. Normally I wouldn't do this, like return to my original base coat to essentially recess shade the miniature, but on black, you really want a decent amount of the thing you're painting to be black, you know? The further away we get from black, the less convincing of a result that we get. And so maybe I don't like paint the very top recess of his shoulder with a pure black, but I'm gonna paint like, you know, the pit section. Maybe I also just do a little base coating around just to kind of clean up the look a little bit, see what we got. Okay, that definitely improved the look. However, I don't think it looks black quite yet. And you know, we may never get exactly to black, you know? One thing that I'm noticing is that his shoulder is significantly brighter than the other fabric that is also on top of his shoulder. And so I'm going to just quickly try to bring those two up in line with one another, because they're like the same piece of fabric and they're super close to one another. So they probably should be a little bit closer in brightness. Still looking a little not opaque enough, a little chalky here on the chest. So I'm gonna keep adding some more highlights here. I can tell I'm kind of I'm kind of getting a little overzealous here with my highlights, and so I'm going to try to take some of these darker maroon colors, maybe mix a little bit of highlight in there, mix a little bit of water in there too, so I can just kind of work with a bit more of a translucent color and try to bring back some of these intermediate colors that I have seemingly lost so it can feel just darker. Right here in this armpit section, that's a great place to try to bring back some color here. This is a clean brush, no paint in here, just to kind of like feather some of that. Try to make that big highlight on top of his shoulder just a little bit smaller, just a little bit too much. Maybe I also just try to use black paint straight up and just kind of like mix some water in there and do a bit of glazing. That way we can maybe reduce some of the kind of maroony brownness that we see in this black here. Well, you know, still keeping a little bit of it around, but just not as much. I think when we can nail this arm, I think we're in a good spot. I think the arm and the chest are going to be important for this front view to really create a convincing effect. I'm also going to deepen some of the blacks here on the lower half, and basically that ended up being kind of in the middle of the detail. So there was a little bit of high at the top, a little bit high at the bottom, and so we'll try to do a bit of glazing in the middle here. That seemed like that was really thick paint. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, clean my brush out. kind of feather this down a bit, feather it over as well into this area. It's hard sometimes to tell how much progress you're making with black paint because when I just take a wet brush and paint over this Mini, everything gets darker, and that's because satin paint and glossy paint and anything that's has a more reflectance than a matte looks darker and more vibrant. It's hard to tell if I'm actually applying a dark paint and making things better for myself, or if I am just making it wet. Are you wet? I'm just gonna sneak into this kind of butt area here and pull the paint downward. As you may or may not know, when you leave the model with your paintbrush, when it lifts off the Mini, that's where the majority of your paint deposits. And so you can take advantage of that property of paintbrushes and brush toward the area you want to have most of the paint in your brush deposit. So in my case, I got a black paint in my brush. I would like most of that paint to deposit where the shadow is. So in that case, toward the bottom of the Mini. I think I see another detail that I missed accenting. Another little kind of tiny baby shadow right there. Definitely want nice dark shadows in every single area where there would be any. That will help kind of break up how much of this bright gray color that we kind of ended up with. Now I think I probably got rid of a bit too much. So we'll come back with some light gray color here just to kind of bring back a little bit of brightness. I have a highlight here starting on the forearm, and I kind of want that highlight to continue all the way up the arm. I'm painting this arm. His arm's like a cylinder, right? And cylinders, as we all know, because we just know our shapes, have highlights that run vertically along them. And if you don't know your shapes, I actually sell a little simple PDF on my web store that has a great breakdown of a bunch of shapes, a bunch of different levels of reflectance, and also in different lighting situations, harsh light and also soft light. And you can take that general information and apply it to the miniatures you're painting. In this case, you're painting an arm. Legs are also cylindrical in nature often. I want that bright highlight that runs along a vertical cylinder to be present on every single one of these little tiny details. It's like there is one long vertical running highlight. It just happens to be broken up by all of these little wrinkly fabric stuff. I think it's actually probably all right if like the top part of the model feels a little bit more gray than the bottom portion of the model. We create this effect where the top part is brighter, the lower part is darker, and because of that, our attention is drawn upward. So I don't know if we need to do too much more work to bring back too much more black, but I am liking where we're at right now. Except for the torso. Ugh. I took a bit of a break in between when you last saw me and now, so I'm looking at this with fresh eyes, and I think we are going to start getting into the futzing process of making this a bit darker and also cleaning up some of the details. So I'm going to start with some pure black matte paint here from scale 75 and just start kind of like feathering it into some of my shadowed areas. I'm going to put a little bit of water over here on my palette so I'm not reaching into my cup to get it whenever I need it. I prefer to just have it right there on the palette. Makes it much faster. Sometimes when you do what I'm doing right now, which is painting these very dark lines on something that's, not that dark, you kind of get this like zebra striping effect. And you see it often when you're like maybe doing like human skin tone. You paint the muscles of someone quite light, and then you try to paint in some shading, and the shading is a very dark like mahogany color or something like that. And you get this kind of like really weird islanding effect where like all the muscles seem like they're popping out like way too intensely. The reason why I care less about that happening here on this is because with the color black, even if it is matte, I'm doing kind of a warmer, kind of a lighter black, I suppose you could say. I do want full on black to be visible on many parts of this model to really have it look and feel as though it is black. And so what I'm going to do is If afterwards it looks weird and zebra stripy, well then I'm not gonna worry about the shadows. I know I want the shadows to be super dark. I'm gonna try to pull down everything else to make it feel less zebra stripy. So if it feels bad, I'm gonna make the highlights darker to match the shadows. So they're kind of like an anchoring point for me. I want this to exist. I'm not sure if the highlights I chose are too light. So this will be my kind of like, you know, artistic litmus test, I guess you could say. It's not actually looking too bad. We're starting to get into the realm of futzing, which is a term you have often heard on this channel. And that's just like, you know, I'm not really sure what's right or wrong with this, but I'm gonna try something and see what happens. And then if it makes it better, I'll do more of it. If it makes it worse, then I won't do more of it, you know? We're kind of getting into there. And right now, what I'm doing is I'm doing some recess shading. Like I mentioned earlier with the zebra striping, and that always helps me clean up the visuals of the paint job to know how close or far away I am from my target goal. Even though I'm not really like adjusting large portions of the model, I'm not glazing any like big black areas in there. Just doing the recess shading is like changing the look and feel of the miniature. It's making it look more black. Even just painting these tiny little thin lines in. Sometimes it's hard to know how far to go on a miniature because there's just paint everywhere, you know? And if you clean up the Mini a bit, you get a better idea of what it's gonna look like when all is said and done. And so that's why I like to do a lot of like, you know, intermediate tests to see if this part was complete, you know, how done would it look? And so it gives me a better idea of that situation. I'm liking it. I think it looks okay. Like I said earlier, if the top half of the model is lighter than the bottom half, I think that's okay. That'll create a satisfying gradient from top to bottom. But I still think we need to do some amount of darkening down of areas, like right here in this elbow area, I think is a good place to have a little bit more of a swing in darkness. Maybe right down here in this middle section, and then doing the same thing on the nearby fabric, right in the middle. Now sometimes it's like difficult to know where to put the highlights on long running vertical pieces of fabric. So on this big curved surface right here, I have a highlight that runs top to bottom. That's pretty much consistent the entire time. And then as it wraps around the model, then I get dark here on the sides. And that I find if there is no other like thing guiding you in terms of like where you should put your highlights and shadows, can be a good thing to do on the sides of miniatures, because it means that when you're looking at it from a front-on perspective, the shadows kind of like wrap around the sides and gives you a nice kind of silhouetting effect from the front. So that is sometimes what I will do if it's like no sculpted indication of where I should go with the Mini. And in this case, in this long running portion right here, there is no flaring out at the bottom like there are on these other ones in the front. Right now I just, again, to reiterate, have very thin black paint in my paintbrush. And I'm just kind of pushing it in the areas where his arms kind of suck into his torso, lower here along his waistline. You know, I'm thinking more globally instead of zoomed in view. I want to clean up this torso a little bit. This torso is a very small detail. You're not going to really think about it a whole lot when the model is all said and done and fully painted. And so it's not looking good right now, and I don't think it's going to be that much better with what I just did, but I don't think it really matters that much because once like the gun is painted and his armor is painted, you're not going to think much about this torso section. As long as there's some amount of paint in this area, I think that's probably going to be good enough. I'm noticing that my glazing efforts in his elbow here are not really going anywhere. It's not really like getting that much darker. So I think I'm probably just thinning my paint a little bit too much. And so I'm gonna grab some of that thicker stuff, mix it into some of my thinner stuff, and then go at it again and let it dry, and then just take stock again and see if that, you know, made a perceivable difference. And if it did, then I know I am kind of on the right track. I'm noticing at the top of the waist here, the highlights are a little scratchy and not that nice. And so I'm gonna get a bigger brush here. I find that sometimes when you're working on a larger area, it's nicer to have a bigger brush instead of making tiny little scratchy lines. You have a bigger, softer tool to kind of soften some of these blends across larger areas with. So I'm just gonna take some kind of this highlight color I have, maybe a bit darker than the highlight color that's on the model in this location, and kind of just like soften it into the darker color that we see in the middle section of his waistcoat. If there's a little bit of texture, you know, that's probably fine. I don't need to fret that much. You know, if I could soften it a little bit, why not? Also, there's a little volume and fabric down here that never really got any attention. Maybe I can add some to this little roll of fabric here. The elbows are often a great little volume to kind of enunciate here. They kind of pop out of the arm. The amount of care and attention that I'm giving to this miniature is probably going to exceed what you would do for a typical rank and file miniature in your army. I'm certainly not going to care this much about the warmer gray that's going to end up on like my death troopers or my riot troopers or stuff like that. I'll probably have a much faster speed painted effect for those minis. I think the chest is maybe just a little too light gray. It's hard to say. I think what I want to do is add some recess shading to the neck in the front here and see what that does for us. I can see in this recess is more of a maroon color than it is a true black color. So let's try to clean that up a bit. Ooh, that is nice and crispy on that neck. We like that. That looks good. Got some vertically running lines here on the chest as well. Let's see if we can, they're looking pretty dark. Let's see if we can carve them in a bit darker. We can indeed. It maybe doesn't look necessarily black. I don't know. I think the lower half here is helping the upper half to feel black, at least black enough. I want to clean up this little V-shaped highlight here. It's a pretty sharp detail, so I'm going to push the shadow up toward the top of it, and then it kind of softens toward the bottom. And so I want my sharp transition at the top of the volume, and then I want to kind of feather it into the next volume on his back, if that makes any sense. I'm probably making no sense right now. Just doing tiny little highlights with some brighter gray here. We want to have this bright gray on the Mini. We just don't want there to be a ton of it, you know? Like I'm just highlighting that upper corner of this like little volume on his back and maybe like a little bit of a edge highlight. And like, that's it. I don't want it to spread out more than that. And also taking my larger brush, it's a little bit softer. We kind of reduce the brightness of that butt highlight a little bit. And now I'm gonna try to pull some black up into that kind of brown, very dark maroon color we have here to make it feel even a little bit darker. I'll clean my brush by eating my paint like a Neanderthal and then kind of soften where those brush strokes ended up into that darker brown color. And maybe still a little too bright by the chest. And it kind of like happens abruptly. To see if we're on track with the warm, cold brown leather, let's try to do the cold leather now, and we're going to switch over to a different paint range. Okay, I'm going to use TT Combat for the cold leather. It's much more of a satin paint range, and I'll use cold highlights for my highlights. I would say this is the much more often used way to paint black leather is to kind of send it in a cold direction. It just looks good, you know. You don't need to think about it more than that. And just like with the other part, we're going to start this by just doing a nice base coat over all the things we want to be this cold black. Just so we have a nice satin base coat to start from. And like I mentioned last time, I like to keep a larger portion of the paint undiluted right next to my diluted stuff. This allows the thicker paint to stay alive longer on the palette. And if I need to thin my paint out, I can mix some more of that thick stuff into my paint. If I need to thin my paint out, I can just add water. So it's nice to have that thicker blob. I actually took a multiple day break from painting that first time when I mentioned it, and this maroon paint was still usable on my palette. So if you keep the paint thick, it can last a very long time, weather, humidity specifically permitting. We're gonna go satin black on the gloves, the belt, the gun, and probably the holsters on his waist and his boots. And just like with the coat, we are going to paint these details multiple times because I'm painting black on black here. It's hard to tell if I'm getting opacity, and I will only know if I have opacity in this situation if I paint a second layer and just don't notice that it changed at all. Then I'll know, okay, I'm here. I can chill out with the base coats. That's another difficult thing when dealing with two different finishes of the same color, is it's hard to remember which one is which sometimes, which is why I put it on the other side of my palette. That will help me to remember, okay, if I'm reaching to the left, I'm good. If I'm reaching to the right, then, okay, something's wrong here. Don't put them next to each other. That would be silly. Another paint product that I busted out to help with this glossy end goal is a black ink. If I feel like this paint is not satin enough, I will start to use the ink in the deepest recesses. And that will help to really drive home the kind of darker, cold feel and glossiness, which will help to further separate the two kinds of black. Ooh, I got my finger in the paint, and then I got some paint on the Mini right there. Again, I'm gonna clean my brush, and I'm going to, even though it looks dry, I'm going to kind of aggressively brush at it. And some of it went away. I'm gonna use the side of my brush maybe here. All right, yeah, there's the culprit. Son of a... You can already see how the finish of this glove is different than the finish, say, of the dark black that you see in kind of the middle section of his lower half. But again, like I said earlier, we're gonna hit it with a second coat, and we're gonna speed through this just to get maximum shiny opacity. You might notice that the model is black again, and that's because I am repainting this section for this video because my dumb glasses blocked the majority of this section. Once we finish the cold black leather, we'll get straight back to the model that we were working on before. All right, let's get started on this glove. I'm gonna start with a highlight that's probably brighter than I would normally start with. And the reason for that is this is a pretty small detail. Compared to the larger things that we did in the cloth before and also the upcoming white armor. Because it's small, what that means is that there's less room for transitions. And I think in a situation like that, it's best to start with an aggressive highlight and then kind of just fuzz the edges with a diluted paint. And so that's what we're gonna do. I also feel like that lends itself to the subject that we're painting, which is kind of like a really reflective leather, you know? This is kind of like NMM, but just a little bit less reflective than metal typically is. So these gloves are like cylinders. They taper at the wrists, and because of that, we're going to treat our highlights in a similar way. So a cylinder has a long running highlight that follows the length of the cylinder. And because it's tapering at the wrist, that long running highlight is also going to taper. Right now, I'm gonna do a little bit of an eye check, and that feels pretty good. Like when I look at it, I kind of think, okay, yes. If that were blended out a little bit more, that would look okay. So I kind of feel like I'm on the right track. The hand is a little jank right now, but we'll fix that. The hand's kind of got a bunch of little tiny wrinkles on it that are difficult to deal with. The other stuff that we're working on that is going to be this cold black color are these kind of boring shapes, these like kind of cubes in these little pouches on his waist. These things are not fun to paint just because it's difficult to know where to put highlights and shadows on a thing that has a bunch of flat edges. It essentially is a bad mirror that reflects the environment surrounding it. Because of that, I'm just gonna focus on doing some edge highlights, kind of painting in a GW heavy metal style. I may add some volumetric highlighting like toward the bottom of each segment of the pouch, but I'm not gonna do much more than that. The gloves are definitely more interesting to paint. Now, when painting something that is reflective, you have to think about what the important viewing angles are. Like, where is this model going to be viewed from? You know, probably the front, maybe the back, and maybe the sides, you know, and then things in between aren't necessarily a viewing angle that we care about. And that's what we're going to kind of lock in on when it comes to asking the question, where do we put our highlights and shadows? Because the tricky thing about reflective stuff, like gloves that are leather or like metal, is that where you put your highlights is a function of where the viewer is with respect to the thing you're looking at. Go grab a metallic thing right now and set it on a surface and kind of walk around it. You'll notice that the highlight follows you. If you do the same thing with a matte object, it would happen, but it would be significantly less obvious. When it comes to painting belts like this, I tend to like to have an edge highlight, of course, and then have a little bit of a highlight develop toward the bottom of the belt. So I'll kind of widen that highlight at the bottom. This little pouch here is more of an interesting shape than the ones on his right side because it kind of fattens at the bottom. And so we will use that to our advantage here and add a little highlight at the bottom where it is round. It's kind of weird how much stuff in the world you can kind of think about like a cylinder, but this pouch is one of those things. You can imagine the curve of a cylinder right here going that direction. And because there's a curve here, there's going to be a highlight that runs along this bottom edge. In fact, the reason for edge highlighting in the first place is because edges aren't exact 90-degree edges. They have roundovers on them. And guess what a roundover is? That's right, it's a cylinder, baby. It's cylinders all the way down. For real though, it is. The other benefit of doing this the second time is that I now know what ends up as black and other colors, so I'm not gonna waste my time painting things that end up white or silver. However, I would have preferred to not have to paint this a second time. I can't be mad, because like, I did this to myself. For the boots, I'm gonna mix a darker shade here, because I'm not really gonna put that much effort into the boots. Even if there isn't a toe volume, like his toes don't stick out, I tend to like paint a little patch by the toe, and then I kind of leave the middle part dark, and then I'll start again like where the foot starts to wrap into the shin and stuff like that. Maybe I'll like add another little thing right here, but yeah, I like there to be a gap in between the toe and where the ankle starts. The majority of the parts of this gun that stick out end up being white, and so I'm just going to sparingly add some highlights along these, once again, cylinders. Just a little stripe, and this won't really need any blending at all. It's just staying like that once everything else is painted and there are some nice recessed shades. These things will look great. There are some little panels here, and so we'll use the very edge of our brush and some paint that has some nice dilution to it, which means it's going to flow nicely to kind of crisp up those edges. And that will be all we do to those tiny little square panels. Like I said, we're going to add a little bit of a highlight to the bottom of these pouches, kind of like the front part of his outfit here. Maybe that kind of like flares out a little bit. Okay, Okay, let's try to clean up this hand here. It seems to be kind of a mess. We definitely lost a finger in there somewhere, but that's okay. We can fix that with black paint later, which we are definitely going to need. I think I'm not going to worry too much about doing edge highlights right now because I believe my future blending processes are going to run over any edge highlights I may do in certain spots. So let's get after it. Let's mix up a not exactly black, but close to black color that we'll use as a step between what we currently have and what is on the model. Maybe it's best just to do straight up black. I don't actually know, but we're gonna try to do a very dark intermediate blue-gray. I made these highlights a little bit bigger than I want the final highlight to be. And that's because I knew that I was going to come in here and make them smaller with this step. Oh, that looks, I mean, for a small amount of work, that looks pretty freaking great. Let's actually zoom in a little bit so you can see something a little bit closer. It's actually impressive how easy that was. This is a technique that I did not come up with. I don't know who came up with it, but I saw it first from a painter on Instagram named Flamion. He paints most things like this, and he just gets really lovely, soft blends. And he goes even harder than I'm going here. He takes even longer to do it. But even with just one little glaze layer to smooth the transition between what we had and what was on the model already, this just looks really nice. Gotta make sure I don't overdo it. Sometimes I have a tendency to think that more is better, but sometimes when you just like the result of something, you should just stop, like right there, even though it was like really fast and easy. The first time I painted this glove, it was laborious. I was really going back and forth with colors to try to develop a blend, but that was very simple. That may not work on everything, like on the bags and the edge highlights on the bags. We'll need to probably do a little bit of a different technique, but for these larger highlights on the gloves, it's working great. If I go a little bit too crazy with the gray, however, I do lose some of that rich satin black that we got from the original base coat. So I will try to bring some of that back right now. Try to feather it into that gray. Cool. All right. The hand is looking messy, as is this weird highlight over here on the glove. Let's see if we can kind of clean that up a little bit. It's looking a little bit too stark. Also, maybe a little bit too gray. I think we need to bring again some of that black back in here. I'm gonna keep working around the model with this diluted dark gray paint here, softening and making these highlights smaller. The middle part of his hand here is kind of flat. There's no fun curves to it like there would be on the ends of his fingers or on this part of his hand that wraps around. So I want to make that part black. I'm also going to try to make these fingertip highlights a little bit smaller. I kind of want there to be like a highlight right at the tip of the finger, but not necessarily wrapping too much around the front. I said this in the last start to finish video, but for me, mini painting is a back and forth procedure. I'll do something, I'll try to adjust it, I'll make it look worse, I'll then try to fix it, and I'll try to land somewhere in the middle. I'm not good enough to nail a result that's satisfactory like in one go, like someone like Ben Comets might be able to do in a similar video format. And I have a feeling that you and I are probably more similar. Everyone's got this little kind of like bony ball joint on their hand right there, and so I'm just kind of enunciating that with my highlighting color here. Oh, I must have missed blending this side of this highlight right here. This highlight right here is a little bit of a strange one that you wouldn't necessarily see if these gloves weren't shiny. It's the highlight that is reflecting the environment below. It's pointing downward. And as such, it's not going to be as strong as the highlight that's facing upward toward our main light source. And I'm not done with my highlights yet. I want to add a bit more strong highlights. And that's when we'll differentiate the highlight that's running on the right side of his glove here versus the one that's pointing down toward the environment on the left side of his glove. Now, let's look at these belts on the back here. Just like everything else we're painting, this is a cylinder. It's a segment of a cylinder. Imagine that this strap was just one big fat strap that was running across his shoulders here. Where it curves down here, that would be, actually, you know what? I painted these wrong. If these are shiny, the highlight wouldn't be on top. It would be where the curve is. Let me fix that. I did that wrong on the original model. And I remember thinking about that while I was editing the video. Should be right about here. That's the kind of decision that makes a paint job look NMM and shiny compared to one that is more matte and less reflective. Those kinds of decisions that accumulate over an entire paint job. It's not just about getting high contrast. That is definitely an important thing when it comes to making something look shiny and reflective. It's also about making those correct choices on every single part of the Mini and every single volume. Wow, incredible. Shout out Flamion. I had dinner with that guy at Adepticon one year, and he's just like the nicest dude. Fortunately, a lot of people in this hobby are just incredibly nice. All right. I think it's a little too small, so we'll just try to make it a bit bigger because I do want to add another bright highlight inside here. And so we need to make space for that highlight. Let's not forget about the back of the gloves here. Kind of soften up some of these weird blobby highlights. There's a lot of strange wrinkles on specifically the back of his left glove. And so it was hard to interpret them the first time, and it's continuing to be difficult the second time here. I want to think about what I thought about on the front where there's some long-running vertical highlight, but that long-running vertical line is broken up by a bunch of bizarre wrinkles in the glove. I don't think there is a break in this detail, but I want there to be one. And so I'm just going to paint one in with some opaque black paint right here. Because I have a nice shadow right here that is kind of on the perimeter of the Mini. So when you're looking at it from the front, you can see the shadow kind of wrap around the glove. And I kind of want that shadow to continue through that particular volume of the glove. I don't really care if it's not sculpted that way. I can make the choice because I've got the power. Sorry, that was cringe. Just like with the highlights running vertical, the shadows would also run vertical up and down these gloves. But yeah, you as the painter, you have the power to adjust the sculpt in small ways. You can't do huge adjustments, but you can do small ones that clean up the model or that make it easier for you to personally paint. Especially when it comes to painting things like the face, you know? You'd be surprised what kind of crimes you can get away with when it comes to painting eyes and like where they actually end up on the model and what you end up painting. You'll see that later when I'm painting the face, if not too much of the footage is blocked by my dumb glasses. I'm not mad. You're mad. This large jelly bean shaped volume on the glove right here is kind of bizarre, so I want to make it smaller. Get some water in my brush here, maybe kind of pull back some of that black paint. I'm seeing two little vertical highlights developing here, so why don't we just send it and split them right down the middle. That was a thing that I learned in the NMM class with Michael Pisarski, is that he started by making a larger highlight on the shoulder of a piece of armor, and then he kind of split it in half or in three different shaped and different sized areas. And that added randomness, which is another reason why doing reflective things is a little bit challenging at times, because there's a lot of randomness involved and it's very difficult for people to be truly random because we're always looking for order. This is the back of the glove. It's not as important as the front of the glove, so I might just not fret that much about the back. That being said, I always like to do a little bit of highlighting work on the knuckles. It's always nice to be able to see the fingies of the model. Let's pump up the jams.
pump them up. This paint is splitting a lot on a wet palette. I was painting some KX security droids last night and using the same paints, and they were doing the same thing then as well. This mixture I'm working with right now is not full Vega blue gray. It is still mixed with some black. I'm gonna just paint inside of my highlights. Don't really want to do it too crazy. I may water this down a little bit more. I'm not worried about the other highlight on this glove. I just want to make this look brighter, not the other part. Honestly, this feels like I'm forcing this and I don't need to be doing what I'm doing right now. It kind of looks good as is, but I'm just curious if this will make it look better. And it kind of isn't. I'm going to take some of our previous layer and do the same thing we did to the first layer and kind of soften some of that brighter highlight we just added. Same to the bottom of this bag here. Where would the most intense highlight on this rounded part be? Right where that curve is. Some right to the belts as well. Forgot to do my little blending to the lower volume on the belt. Kind of just went a little too hardcore though to make this a little bit fatter. Now that there's too much gray there, we'll come back in with black and apply that right to the top, just so there's a nice transition on the belt from dark to a gray to that kind of bluish color. I'm noticing here on the highlight on his shoulder, there's kind of a hole in the middle of where I added that brighter second layer. That happens sometimes. It's important to fix that while you can. If you try to apply a highlight on top of that with like a brighter color, you'll just be fighting that all the way up. So if you notice that kind of like pinhole, just fix it as soon as you can. Kind of a sharp transition right here. Let's try if we can soften that a little bit. Okay, we got to give some more love to the boots here. They're looking a little sad. Add a bit of a brighter highlight to the toes here. It's astounding how little work you have to do to boots. It's just not something people and myself look at. And so it often feels like a waste of time to do more than the bare minimum. Lastly, on the boots, there's a little lip on the bottom here, and it's nice to give that an edge highlight. This is a very common detail on many a miniature. Okay, let's do some cleanup. This edge highlight looking a little thick. Let's make it smaller with some pure black from TT Combat here. Same with the top portions of these little tiny packs on his bigger pack. It's looking a little too gray at the top, so let's try to darken it a bit. This edge highlight's looking too thick and inconsistent, so let's try to make it small, but also just follow that curved shape that it has. Now, it's difficult with this little sack here because there's this little kind of window pane in the middle, which means there's an edge on the outside and an edge on the inside. And if you were crazy, you would edge highlight both of those things. And I'm crazy. I didn't do that the first time, and I don't think you should do that, but let's just see if we can, you know? I don't want a highlight that's this bright, and I don't want a highlight that's this dark. And so maybe we can do a little in-betweeny. You want paint that's got a decent amount of liquid in there, so that it flows nicely off your brush. You want a nice sharp tip as well. This is the kind of thing that would very often require a lot of back and forth. Sometimes it's just easier to paint poorly with the edge highlight and then come in with a recessed shade to clean some stuff up, which is what we are gonna try to do. Oh, I forgot that little sack right there. Are you gonna hate me if I don't paint that? Or are you gonna comment below saying this is clickbait? Let's finish this first. Get some nice edge highlights on these little things. I want to make the edge highlights at the top here thinner. I think I went a little too crazy. It's difficult to see where the edge of this little micro pack ends and where the edge of the larger cube shape begins. I'm just going to assume it's the same thing and stop fretting about it, because that honestly looks pretty dang good. Let's also make sure we do some lovely edge highlighting to these belts. I'm always kind of amazed how much a nice edge highlight can clean up a blend and make it seem like it was nicer than when there was none. That's why I do so many intermediate recess shades and edge highlights during the painting process before I know I'm done or I'm not, because I want to kind of get a peek, like I was saying earlier. This edge highlight is a little bit wavy. Let's see if we can kind of straighten her out. Okay, I heard Steve say that it'd be clickbait if I didn't paint this other sack, so let's do it. This one is so tiny though that I don't think it needs much other than just some edge highlights. And then once I paint that silver buckle in the middle, it'll kind of break up everything nicely and it will look correct. In fact, I know that because I did that the first time and it looked fine. Steve, last I want to do an edge highlight that connects these two bands of highlight on the glove, right on the top. I'm going to do the same thing on the other glove as well. I like to do that whenever you have a surface that's broken up. A nice edge highlight to unify everything often does great. This edge highlight over here on this little portion looks a little wavy. Let's see if we can straighten her out as well. Hell yeah. This looks pretty good. And right on time, because I have a minute left of recording space on this drive. Back to the original model. Okay, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, we're going to make the white armor feel kind of like yellowed plastic or dusty armor from Tatooine that you see on the stormtroopers. What I've learned in the past about trying to make a colored neutral color, like whether it's a cold black or a yellowy white or a greeny white, you need to not go gung-ho with the color. You need to probably paint fairly close to neutral white or neutral black, with a little bit of interest in there, and then adjust toward the color when you're done. Because if you start too yellow or too green or whatever fun color you're using, it is very difficult to make it look not that color with just highlights. It requires a lot of back and forth. So just really sneak up on that color as much as you can. So my yellowy color that is going to, help me push toward this plasticky white that's been yellowed over time is going to be ochre from AK Interactive. And I'm not going to paint with that. I'm going to just adjust with it at the end. My base coat color is going to be light earth from AK, which is just a tan color, So it's got a little bit of yellow in it, but it's not screaming at you. And then I will use white from Yosonia, titanium white, to get my brightest and whitest highlights. Already I feel like this color is yellowed enough. Like I really like what that looks like. We'll see though as it gets more and more opaque. I think that looks so good. I cannot wait to see this completed. I think I want to paint these clips where the Stormtrooper armor meets the straps in silver, just to get a bit of variety, but also just so that it's easier to see from a distance that, oh, this is supposed to be a different thing, It's not more Stormtrooper armor. On second thought, I think I'm going to paint a lot of these like chunky square connector bits and belt bits in white. I think that's going to be good for the scheme, just having more stuff on the Mini that is this kind of like creamy yellowy white color. I love that color. I think it looks so good. I think if the majority of the white armor looks and feels like this color when it's all said and done, I will be very happy. Like I said earlier, I think I'm going to paint a few details on this gun in white just to give us a little bit of variety here and to kind of break up all this black. It'll kind of give this gun also a cool feel, like the commander has a special gun that isn't a typical one. I want to paint this, but I also want this to stay black, but let's just see what it looks like as white. We'll keep the tip black. Okay, and now we're just going to do a lot of base coating until this is nice and opaque. Some reminders about base coating. You want to be pretty vigilant about not agitating drying paint. And so just move across the model, and once you've painted a section for a few seconds, just move on right away. Like don't keep hitting that area with your paintbrush, because you will likely disturb some partially dried up paint and then create a micro texture. And over the course of many layers of paint, you will create even more texture. It'll just increase and increase and increase and build up. So try to, as best as you can, paint a section of the part you're working on, and then even if it looks kind of bad and hairy, just move on and move to the next part. Like, I want to keep touching that right there, but I shouldn't. It'll just look bad. I am getting some white paint on the black of the surrounding fabric details. I'm not even going to bother fixing these issues for now, just because I'm going to keep causing problems likely as I continue to highlight this white armor. And so I'll just keep it as is and then fix all of it later in one larger repair step. I feel like something else needs to be white on this gun, and so I'm going to paint this back portion here. All right, let's start doing some highlights. I'm going to take some of my white paint here and mix my first highlight. You can't go brighter super fast, because that's how you get like an obvious chalky white effect. You want to build up your brightness kind of slowly, just to make sure that you're getting full opacity with each passing layer. I think that paint is sticking a little bit too much. Add a little water to it. I'm going to try to maintain this nice khaki color in the recesses on sharp details, like this center thing in his chest and the recess next to the clips on his shoulders and all sorts of stuff like that. But if I mess up, I can always just come back and paint those little thin lines again. So this chest is a pretty satisfying chest to paint, just because it's pretty obvious like where you should put the highlights and shadows. One large round shape. I'm going to pull this first highlight down the front of his torso alongside this like instrument panel in the middle of his chest here. And then I'll let the tan color exist on the lower sides of his rib cage. And then the future layers that I paint, I will start to leave behind more and more paint on the lower half and just work on like this upper upturned section of his chest. One thing I also mentioned in the other start to finish video that I did that featured a lightly colored thing was that you need to apply the same layer of highlight multiple times in a row when you're working with light colors to get that nice opacity. Similar to the black earlier, you need multiple layers all the time to get opacity. So I'm going to do a few layers just to get a nice first layer of highlights here. Create a little bit of a fuzzy transition by brushing toward the more opaque highlight layer we have here. But I'm not fretting too much about getting nice blends this early in the process. I just want to get nice opacity where it matters. When you're highlighting, you're using a significantly smaller quantity of paint than when you are base coating, and so the paint that you are applying is drying much, much faster. And as such, you can agitate some of the paint closer to where you're working sooner than if you were base coating, because the paint is just drying faster. So keep that in mind. That was a good first layer of highlights. Let's mix a little bit more white paint into our tan color here and just keep it going. I will likely not use pure white as a layer on this armor at all, and instead I will use it only as an edge highlight. There is a bit of a edge in the middle of his torso here that surrounds this instrument panel. It's like a little bit of an angular look. So I might Might do a bit of a highlight that runs alongside this panel in the middle of his chest here, but I'm not gonna go all the way to the bottom. And it's gonna get smaller and smaller. I wanna go faster, but there's so much black paint that's very detailed around this white center, and so I'm going to have to just chill out a bit. Try to clean my brush quickly here by dabbing it on my sponge, and then my brush isn't perfectly clean, and so I'll kind of like feather this down into the side of the torso here to, again, get the first attempts here at some blending. If you don't want to eat your paint, wet paper towel is a very good alternative. I'm gonna grab the first layer of highlight we did and kind of soften this transition a bit. Clean my brush off in my wet paper towel immediately below my hands, and then brush it into the still wet paint. All right, let's just try to save some time, and we'll just jump to diluted white right now. Diluted white is not gonna dry as bright and brilliant as pure opaque white, and so we can kind of fake it as another step in our progression of highlights here. I don't think I need any of that yellow color. I think this is the exact result that I want for my Stormtrooper armor. Now I just got to figure out how to do it fast. I always like to paint characters first in an army because that really helps me dial in like the look of what it is I'm going for. You know, I had this idea of like this yellowed Stormtrooper armor, Nicole in a warm black, and then using little LEDs as spot colors. But I don't really know if that's going to work out. You know, that could be a bad idea. And so it's always nice to experiment on a character because the characters are, you know, you're not stressing about time or efficiency. You just are trying to get something that looks great. And if you do something that you're not a big fan of, that you have to change in the future, the character looking different isn't going to feel that bad because he's a character and he's supposed to be special. So it's nice to start with these guys. I'm grabbing some thicker, more opaque white paint here to do some edge highlighting with actual white on some of the belt components and these little scopy bits. It is still a little too thick though. I'm just using the edge of my brush here to apply an edge highlight to his torso armor. I don't know if we're done with the blending on the white here, or even like the progression. Maybe I want to go a little bit brighter, but it's nice, just like with doing the recessed shading, to kind of get a look at the final result or something closer to it to see how happy you are with the outcome. And that gives you an idea about whether or not you should keep going or not. I'm gonna grab some of our base coat here. I'm gonna water it down a little bit. I'm gonna dab off a lot of the paint in my wet paper towel. And then I'm gonna try to just glaze it into the rib cages here. Make it look nice and nice soft transition into this tan color. Maybe pull a little bit of it down here in this center console thing. And I'll maybe grab an intermediate highlight layer here and kind of do the same thing. Just soften some stuff. Grab some more of this diluted white paint and kind of, you know, there's a lot of water in my brush too. Wipe off some excess on my finger. Brush toward where I want the highlight to be. Let's grab some thicker white paint. It's gonna be more opaque. We'll put it in some spots that we really care about. Right here in the middle of the chest. Right at the tops of the shoulders, strappy parts. Right on the top clip thing. This instrument panel in the middle here is looking a little chalky, so I'm gonna hit it with a a layer of highlight. It's looking a little chalky right there. I'm gonna do a little bit of an analysis here, take a look at a couple feet away, kind of get an idea for how it feels, maybe on the tabletop. Looking okay, liking it. There are some minor things I'd like to adjust here. On this side, it's still a little not nice. There's some obvious previous layers sticking around that you can see because I'm not getting full opacity. So I'll grab my second highlight here and just kind of try to clean it up a bit. Grab my shadow color, try to do a bit of wet blending between the two. I forget about this clip right here. I'm gonna hit that up with a highlight as well. I could tell my white highlight paint here is getting a little too diluted, so I'm just gonna mix some more white paint into my khaki color to get some more opacity for these highlights. Fun fact, a lot of paint manufacturers will use white paint as a way to increase the opacity of their paints. So just mix it into the paint, because a lot of pigments just naturally are not opaque, and so they need the strength of titanium white or whatever it may be to be opaque. Let's try to get some edge highlights on these little squares over here. Still having some issues with this side of the torso and opacity. Just nuked that with a hair dryer to make sure it's all nicely set. And I'm going to come in here with a brighter khaki highlight. Mix a little bit more paint in there to get some more opacity. And try to paint something that looks close to the color that's currently there. And then try to grab some darker color to do a bit of wet blending. I'm not touching these little LEDs in the middle of his torso panel here because I'm gonna paint those with brighter, more saturated colors. One of the last things we'll do is we'll grab this bright white paint, nice and opaque, and we'll try to paint along the bottom side of his armor here. That'll create even more separation between the black and the white armor. Okay, I think I'm pretty close to being done, if not totally done. And so what I'll do now is I'll clean up the parts around the armor that I totally messed up. We'll start with the warm black, and we'll use the matte black paint to fix it. I have no idea why I'm using my bigger brush. Fool. I'm gonna come back with my original tan base coat color and try to get some nicer recessed shades. They're just more consistent. It seems like on this side they were not as large as they were on the other side. Okay, this guy is looking great. We have a few small details remaining, clips and buckles and LEDs, but the most important thing that we have remaining is the face. So let's work on that next. Oh, fuck, my back hurts so much. All right, I'm gonna grab some AK colors here for a Caucasian skin tone and paint this guy in a nice rich tone. That is not opaque enough. I can tell that I've mixed too much water into this paint. Part of the indicator for me is that it is running into the recesses like a wash would do. So I think I need to take a bit more of my thick paint here and mix it in here. I hate that when that happens because that kind of just ruins all of the recess shading that, you know, is still there around the neck from its black turtleneck thing. So, oh well, we'll let this dry and then we will hit it with another layer or two. After about 4 or 5 layers of painting here, his face is looking nice and opaque, and we can move on to our second highlight here. We use Light Flesh from AK Interactive for the first base coat, and for our next highlight, we'll use Highlight Flesh. I'm actually gonna just keep it as is. It seems kind of thin. Ooh, that is way too bright. That is way too bright. We need to mix an intermediate color. Let's try again. Now this is a dude. And sometimes with male characters, or just characters that are more masculine in general, it doesn't necessarily need to be a man, but just people who are rougher around the edges, it's nicer to keep some of these sharper, wrinkly face details around. So he's kind of got like a scar on his forehead here, and a really strong brow line, and normally I wouldn't keep those things around, but because this guy seems a bit more grisly, I will do that. What I mean by keep it around is I'm going to have the initial base coat that we applied here stick around in the recess. That is going to make him look a lot meaner and a lot more aged. And just like I said, just a bit rough around the edges, which we want that for our Imperial grizzled commander. I think we're gonna paint the eye patch silver. I think that'll be really cool. You can see on this side of his face, this cheek and jawbone don't have as nice of an obvious separation of detail, and that's, you know, because there's a big old eye patch in the way. There's a big old scar in the way as well, so it's kind of hard to see it. And just like with the white armor, we're gonna apply multiple layers of highlights. A bit too much going on in this face and too small of an area, I would say. There's so much very fine detail going on under the eye patch, and I can't really see it at all. All right, I'm gonna try to paint that scar in again. It'll be more obvious when we come back with some more highlights, which let's just do that now. Let's start on the important details. We'll go here, we'll go here. We'll do the same thing on the other side of his head. Let's make the bridge of his nose, the end of his nose as well, and his 2 little nostrils. I like having separation between the bridge of the nose and the end of the nose. That just creates a sculpted detail where there often is none. Get some highlight on that cheekbone, sneak some paint right up into there. This is a well sculpted face. It's just like really small, so normally these things are not found on a face of this size, but maybe on a larger scale. But if they're here, might as well paint them. I am supporting the back of the head with my thumb because my brush is pushing the Mini downward, and it's on double-sided tape, so it's moving around a lot. I want a nice grippy, or a nice stable grip on my Mini. All right, paint that upper lip a bit. The chin, always important. Paint up that jawline and the lobe of his ear. Try to sneak some in right under the eye patch. You can really get away with a lot with a grizzled face like this. He's also got some horizontally running wrinkles across his entire forehead. I'm gonna grab some of my highlight paint here, and I know it's more diluted because there's like moisture in my brush, and I'm just gonna run across this entire forehead. I don't really know where the sculpted detail is exactly. I'm kind of just guessing, and you know, honestly, if I can't see it when I'm 6 inches away from this Mini, you're not gonna be able to see it when you are on the table. So I just want to emulate the sculpted texture with my brushing choices. Okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of this red that was from painting the black earlier, and I'm gonna mix it with my skin tone to get an even warmer color. And I think I'm gonna mix some black in as well. I'm gonna try to paint that scar again. think some water also will help to encourage some flow. Yeah. That looks awesome. I love it. Let's go a little bit brighter on the highlight. We'll take this final highlight color we had and then mix in some white. And then we'll just add some bright highlights to those spots we care so much about. The brows, the nose area, the upper part of the chin, other elements of his forehead. Okay, let's start working on his one eye, which will be a little challenging. I'm going to use some of this reddish black color to be the first base coat that I do. I can't see the eye right now. I can see where I've left paint behind, and so I'm just going to kind of paint in that general area, and then we'll take a look here and see how we did. Looks okay. I'm going to go a little bit bigger here. Okay, that's starting to feel good. I know that I am painting too large right now. I have gotten paint on his lower eyelid, but I would rather do that than leave behind any amount of eye real estate that I can get my grubby little paintbrush on. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take some white paint, mix some of this kind of pinky flesh in. I could probably honestly just use the pink flesh straight up and you wouldn't even notice that it wasn't white. So let's just do that. Everybody hold your breath. Okay, I've located the eye in muscle memory, and now I will keep pushing down to cover more and more of that eye. I am not doing a traditional brush stroke. I am just pushing the brush 1% down more and more each time because I want to have some of that black show up. Unfortunately, I went a little bit too hard, and the top half of the eye has a decent, little black line, but the bottom half we're kind of missing out on. Also, I want you to notice that I'm painting over the lower eyelid, you know? This eye is just, sometimes you can get the lower eyelid and everything, but this eye is just too small. Okay, feeling okay? I like the area we covered. Yeah. I don't know if that's where the sculpted eye is, but that looks good enough to me. I kind of want it to be a little bit more opaque white though. Nice. Okay, now let's paint a pupil, and we'll just do it, or an iris. I actually don't remember what they're called. That's the starting point. I think my paint is not cooperating with me, so. Okay, cool. Some things that I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to have the eye be larger at the top than it is at the bottom, because your upper eyelid tends to come down on your eye and cover your upper portion of your pupil and iris, but not as much as the lower portion of your pupil and iris. And so you'll get this tapering effect where it's like cut off on the top and like more obvious and round at the bottom. I think it's a bit too much of a line and not enough of a circle. It looks okay. It is not perfect. And that's fine, you know? I should just be happy with this, but I'm not. I'm gonna take some of this like kind of maroon color and just kind of paint his lips with a very diluted version of it. Because lips are a different color than your skin. And so just doing a little bit of a warmer or browner color, and then maybe like hitting it with a bit of a highlight as well. Maybe some skin tone mixed in. This is definitely not opaque enough. Okay, let's mix some more skin tone in. All right, cool. Also with this kind of pinky red color that we've created here, let's create a glaze, dab off the excess in our wet paper towel, and let's give him some warmth in his cheeks here. I like to do this side of his temple as well. I think that creates a nice bordering effect where, you know, the sides of his face are warm and shadowed and the center of his face is cold. And so it kind of draws you in a little bit. Try to get this upper lip all nice and cleaned up. Yeah, he looks mean and angry, and I like it. Why do I like bad guys? What does that say about me? All right, now what we're gonna do is we're going to paint the eye patch and the surrounding hair and turtleneck black, just to make sure that this is looking good. Again, we wanna see that final outcome. I would like his neck to be paint it a bit more, and also I would like there to be more separation between his neck and his jawline here. So we're gonna do that real quick. Paint a little thin line there, and then grab our first highlight and paint this neck a bit that's popping out, and also maybe the jawline a bit. Gotta be super careful. Again, I don't exactly know where the sculpted hair is supposed to end, and so I'm trying just to do something that looks natural. Like, does he have a super big old receding hairline, or is there supposed to be hair in there? I don't know. You get to make that choice as the painter, because, you know, after a few layers of paint, it's hard to see this stuff. So kind of just sneak up on it until it feels right, and that kind of feels right. I think that looks good. Okay, cool. Now we fix the mistakes that we made with the black paint. Okay, we could paint his hair black. That would make sense. However, I feel like it'd be better if it were blonde. They are space Nazis after all. Hey, if you are enjoying this course, I have some good news for you. I make what is essentially a deluxe version of this video in the form of a masterclass course. On my web store, I sell a variety of display models, and along with them, for a $20 discount, you can buy a masterclass course that not only explains how to paint the model in gratuitous detail like you see here in this course, but it also gives you all the information about how to accomplish the techniques used in that video. So if I mention wet blending or feathering or any other technique, I also teach you how to do those techniques as well. So there's no jumping around. It's a fully comprehensive educational experience. If you're an intermediate painter looking to up your game, this is a great next stepping stone in your painting journey. There are 3 different instructors, including myself, so you get a little bit of variety in teaching style as well. Also, if you're not sure about buying some weird YouTuber's online class, which I totally understand, there are several free lessons inside each course so you can better understand what you're getting. I appreciate you letting me yap about my masterclass courses. On to the next chapter. Blonde hair is not very yellow. It's a lot of browny yellow kind of colors. And I made that mistake many times early on in my career trying to paint blonde hair. So we'll start out with a light tan color. Okay, am I forcing this out? Is this gonna explode on my palette? I'm scared. This paint is going to have terrible opacity. I know it. So this is gonna take a while, but it's one of the last things we have to do. So it's exciting. Wow, she's thick. One thing that I am doing with my army that I enjoy is I have 2 leaders and I have 2 like distinct unit types. I have like my all black elite forces in my death troopers and in my imperial special forces. And then I kind of have the more grunty guys, like in the stormtroopers, the riot guys with the big shields and batons. And one of my commanders aesthetically is linked to one half of that army, and the other commander is linked to the other portion of that army. So this is my Imperial agent, unnamed, and he has the stormtrooper armor, and my other person will better match the more elite forces of my army, which I like. I think that makes sense. The other reason why I like this blonde hair is that it's going to mesh well with the warm color of his stormtrooper armor. It's not all about trying to make him look like a Nazi, you know? I want to try to push this paint all the way over the black. I don't really want there to be a black line separating the blonde of the hair and the skin tone. And just requires some patience. And if I get a little bit of hair on the skin tone, it really isn't that big of a deal anyways. Remember what I said earlier about this middle section on his gray-brown apron not being an important detail and that it would kind of fade away once we painted more stuff? I don't know about you, but I'm not even looking at that thing at all. So something to keep in mind when you are painting the early parts of the model. You do not need to go as hard as you think you do, because just having more of the miniature finished really makes other parts look a whole heck of a lot better. Let's begin to do our first highlights. Now, with blonde hair, you could totally get away with just mixing a little bit of this tan color into that color that we used from Scale Color. It's called Arabic Shadow. I want it to be a little bit more true to the blonde color, and so I will actually mix some of this AK Interactive ochre color into my Arabic Shadow from Scale 75 to keep it a little bit yellow. And then additionally, I will mix in some white paint as well so that we're getting, you know, a highlight actually. A little bit more yellow, a little bit more white, bada bing, bada boom. Maybe a little too bright. I just used my hair dryer a little bit too intensely on the hair. And so I'm just gonna let this part of the model cool off a bit before I go back to working on the hair. And I'm going to just paint his little badge thing on his chest. Maybe I will also paint the inside of this panel thing black as well, just to make it feel like it matches the other thing on his chest that I just painted. I don't need the LEDs to be full black. I just need the recess around the perimeter and also the little cracks in between to be black, because those will just stay black. All right. In typical Scott fashion, I also got a little bit of black paint on the edge here. So let me just fix that up real quick. Oh, that's gonna look great when it's got some little colors in there. Let's do some hair highlights. This hair is fairly finely textured. I'm not going to worry about getting it exactly in the right place. I'm just gonna try to approximate it as best as I can. You know, kind of just give it a hair-like texture. You know? Also on our first highlight, we can ignore the finer micro texture. And for our later highlights, that's when we can start to introduce maybe some really thin, strandy bits of hair. I say that, and I'm currently highlighting the thin strands. Good job, Scott. Pinching the model right now. I want to make sure that I don't do too much of that, because that's how you rub paint off your Mini. Okay, looking good for a first highlight. Let's mix some more white in, maybe a skosh more yellow. And now we're gonna be more sparing with our highlight usage here. I'm gonna focus a lot of my attention on like this front area of his head and less so on the top of his head. I want to add some more brightness to the top of the head. I'm kind of just doing it in this stripy fashion here. I don't care much about the back of the head. I just want to, I want it to vaguely look like hair texture and, kind of has some of the same contrast as we have on the front of the face. But like otherwise, this is not very important to me. I think it looks fine. Maybe I do a bit of a brighter highlight in the very front of the face. All right, and now we got a blonde Imperial Officer with not too gaudy of a yellow saturated color here. And now I think we will go on to one of the two last parts here. We'll paint some silver and then we'll paint some LEDs. Let's just get all the paint that we need on the palette right now. Normally what I would do at this point in the paint process is flip my palette around so that this edge is closer to me. But my palette is stuck down with poster tack so it doesn't move around for the sake of the camera and framing. But I always like all my paints that I'm going to be using to be close to me. Just easier to reach them and get them. I don't need a lot of these primary colors, these yellow, blue, green. Also, I don't need to thin this stuff like at all because it's going in very tiny little spots and it just needs to be fully opaque. Let's do some silver first. I think his little gun magazine thing here could be silver, and that would be cool. I like it a lot. Sorry for being a dork. It's just it's very enjoyable to see a model come together at the end, you know? Nothing beats it, truly. I'm gonna leave a lot of that black in the recesses, and that's gonna be honestly good enough. Oh yeah, I wanted to paint this little rectangle here on the satchel silver as well. And last, but certainly not least, is eye patch. Now, I was pretty careful to paint the edges of the eye patch, at least as best as I could. It's hard to do it because it's hard to see where the eye patch ends and where the skin scarred tissue begins. And so I'm going to not push down as hard as I can with my brush here and keep some of that black line around his eye patch. I think the skin is not bright enough. I think we're gonna, now that I'm seeing it, I'm gonna grab some of this beige from the Stormtrooper armor and we're gonna just make it pop just a bit more, really brighten it up. Okay, cool. All right, last, let's do these little LEDs and finish this Imperial officer off. I'm just gonna paint the LEDs in white first, and then I will paint them in color. And we'll do the same thing to his little torso. Red is the coolest color in the Imperial LED thing, so let's start with some red. And this will get us a one coat effect. Let's do some yellow. And that'll pair up very nicely with the yellow in the Stormtrooper armor and in his hair. And then with the blue, we'll do this bottom stripe. We'll do the two final chips on his chest. I'm just gonna clean up some of this black because I messed it up a bit. And then we'll call it a day. Yes. Okay, let's pop them on one of my finished bases and take a look at our new Imperial agent. I just glued Eden Versio and my new Imperial agent to my finished bases, and I could not be happier with the outcome of these two guys. Eden was actually my test for the scheme a long time ago, doing a warm gray with a cold black armor. And I think it worked out really well on both characters. I like how I went with the matte paint for his warmer black fabric. On Eden, I just did the same paint range all over the miniature, and you can see that it's the same kind of finish. So I think it really helps to have a satin black for one and a matte black for the other, just for a little bit of extra contrast of finish. Painting these characters has got me hyped to paint the rest of the army. I love that khaki white so much. It looks so good. And I can't wait to do it on the Stormtroopers that I have. All right, next video in this army scheme is going to be very different than this one. This was a very detailed project where you saw every single brushstroke. In the next video, you're gonna see me complete a lot in a video, but not necessarily see every single aspect of it. It's gonna be fun. I'm excited to have this army done and to show you guys and to play with my friends in one of the coming weekends. It's happening soon. I don't know when. I should probably look at a calendar and plan, but
I'm bad at planning. If you guys like this channel and you want to support it and you want to support it with something you're going to enjoy, like I mentioned earlier, those masterclass courses are definitely for you. If you enjoyed this, you're definitely going to enjoy those things as well. Otherwise, you can pick up the hobby tools that I use on Amazon. I get a little bit of an affiliate kickback at no extra expense to you. You can check out my Patreon where you get access to videos earlier than everybody else. I sell a bunch of hobby tools like my brush coffin and my cutting mat on my web store as well, along with those miniatures and masterclass courses. And yeah, that's it. Share the good word about the channel if you enjoyed the video. If you like this kind of start to finish style, I have more videos just like this in a playlist that I will link in the description below and also at the end of this video. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to...